So, today I want to talk about toxic dust near dried lakes. As the climate changes, we're seeing a multitude of effects occur in regions where water sources and lakes are drying up. We are seeing ecosystems made unbalanced, local economies destroyed, and of course, water reservoirs are slowly disappearing. That said, there's an effect that may not be as obvious at first, namely toxic dust spewing from the bottom of these lake beds. So today, we're going to look at two examples of this that have occurred in the western United States, as well as an example of the Aral Sea in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. So to start with today, let's take a look at what's occurring in the Great Salt Lake in Utah. We have here that the air surrounding Salt Lake City is occasionally turning poisonous. The lake bed contains high levels of arsenic, and as more of it becomes exposed, windstorms are carrying that increased level of arsenic into the lungs of nearby residents, who make up 3/4 of Utah's population. We have this potential environmental nuclear bomb that's going to go off if we don't make some pretty dramatic action, said Joel Ferry, a Republican state lawmaker and rancher who lives on the north side of the lake. The fact that a Republican is in any way addressing the environmental realities and potential climate implications of this particular incident is already a reason to acknowledge just how scary this is. This Republican state lawmaker was left in a place where he could not deny the reality of what was going on around him and people getting sick from this arsenic dust that was being kicked up from the lake. Now, the unfortunate reality is, even with that being accepted and understood by one Republican politician, there's a likely possibility that this actually won't get addressed because it's really not in the financial interest of a lot of people to do so. In fact, when we go more into this, we find that saving the Great Salt Lake would require letting more snow melt from the mountains flow to the lake, which would eventually fill it if the water was used in less quantities, which means less water for residents and farmers. That would threaten the region's breakneck population growth and high-value agriculture. There we go, it's the agriculture that needs to be protected, something state leaders seem reluctant to do. So what we really have here is a situation where the financial interest of people in the region is in conflict with their own need to have clean air to breathe, as toxic fumes from the lake bed will likely spread. Now, as with any dust, this would already be a problem, even if we didn't have arsenic present. But arsenic certainly makes it worse. Further, the increased amount of dust that's going to be kicked up could enter into the blood and lungs of people, severely injuring those with chronic asthma or other breathing issues in much greater amounts than other people. And, this dust can even have mundane effects, like decreasing visibility for cars and planes, and potentially causing potential accidents that could lead to an increase in loss of life or injury. Now, furthermore, if dust with salt is kicked into the air, then not addressing this problem isn't really going to make any sense, because that very same agricultural industry that they're trying to protect and they need that water for will get destroyed if salted air and salted dust gets kicked onto land, which will prevent crops from growing. This will cause major damage to the local food supplies and local economies. So, next up, I want to talk about a similar story that occurred in the Salton Sea in California, or as it probably should be more known at this point, the Salton Wasteland. The original vision for Salton City was clear. It was going to be a bustling resort with crystal blue waters right next to the Salton Sea, where residents could have boats and, have palm trees and the whole experience. And now the city's reality is more grim. Instead of a vacation spot, it actually looks like a post-apocalyptic ghost town, with most of the homes that were built demolished, and many of them never built in the first place. Palm trees are stumps, and the sea, while beautiful, is toxic and disappearing. Now, as we go on to talk about the dust component of this, because there's a lot of other environmental impacts that happen to this region, as well as economic ones. But when we get to the dust portion, we find that Imperial County, which is the county in which this location exists, one of the poorest counties in California with predominantly Latino residents, has been especially affected by a rotten egg odor from hydrogen sulfide overrunning the sea's oxygen-deprived water. It's also exposed to the dust billowing from dry lake bed, which contains toxins like arsenic and selenium. So one of the important aspects of this is that it's not just going to affect the communities right nearby. Any community that is downwind from any of these lake beds is going to be affected. Obviously, the further you are away from it, the less likely that it's going to cause problems. However, if you're in any way a town maybe right nearby that happens to be downwind, you're probably going to be affected by this. Now, looking at more information here, we see that Imperial is known for some of the worst air quality in the country. It has the highest rate of asthma-related emergency room visits for children in California, about double the state average. Now, that means that a lot of this dust is actually causing the asthma, more than likely. It's not just exacerbated because you have asthma, but may, in fact, be causing it. Now, the sea highlights an environmental justice crisis in the state, as some experts point out that policy delay and inaction is linked to the fact that populations living closest to the sea are predominantly low-income communities of color. If the sea was next to Los Angeles, it would have been fixed long ago, Ruiz said. But it's next to poor communities, and they don't have the political leverage. So, this is quite a stark difference from what we saw in the Great Salt Lake, where the economic interests involved are actually trying to prevent actual results from happening. In this case, we're seeing a lack of action because it's it's primarily affecting poorer populations and, of course, people of color. And so nothing is getting done to resolve that particular issue. And, this is what happens almost all the time when we see these climate disasters. We find that these situations do not get fixed or even acknowledged until they start affecting wealthier communities. And when they do affect wealthy communities, it's only really dealt with when, again, financial interests align. When it gets so severe that it'll start affecting the bottom line of people. And, we always find that poor people and people of color are always the ones left to face these worst effects of climate change pretty much across the globe. And speaking of across the globe, let's take a look at a third example by examining what has gone on historically in the Aral Sea in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and part of the area that made up the former Soviet Union. So the problems began actually in the 1940s, when the Soviet government built a series of irrigation projects along the Aral's tributaries to support its newly established cotton farms. Now, cotton is a very water-intensive crop. It takes in a lot of water. That is not necessarily the best thing to be growing in a region that otherwise might be mountainous or desert. By the 1960s, however, so much water was diverted from the lake that it actually began to shrink. As cotton production ramped up, more and more water bypassed the Aral Sea, causing its levels to fall dramatically and increasing its salinity. By 2007, the Aral was about a tenth of its original size. Now, in the lake bed, the exposed lake bed contains high concentrations of crop-killing salt, as well as pesticides and industrial chemicals and fertilizer runoff. These irritants swirl in the air during dust storms, causing things like tuberculosis, cancer, lung disease, and potentially causing illness in tens of thousands of people living nearby. So that's another factor that really wasn't talked about in the other articles. But yeah, the pesticides, industrial chemicals, and fertilizer runoff could be a major contributing factor to a lot of these dusts being dangerous. It's not just the idea that, its natural arsenic levels or anything under the lake bed. It's more likely going to be chemical pesticides that are manifesting into the air and going to cause long-term dangerous effects. Like we see tuberculosis, cancer, and lung disease are not things that you want to see happening. Now, further, this situation in particular is interesting because when the Aral Sea has been exposed, there's also been an island that was revealed where the Soviets are said to have conducted open-air biowarfare experiments during the 1950s, including testing on things like anthrax. So we don't know if that could be potentially in the air there as well. But that's, another dangerous aspect of all of this. So furthermore, the circumstances here in the Aral Sea are actually quite similar to what we've seen in the Colorado River in the United States. Before anybody goes and tries to make any negative comments specifically about the Soviet Union, this has happened in the US and in greater quantities in the US as well. The overuse of tributaries to grow water-dependent crops like cotton, leading to a shrinking water supply, is a common story. With the addition of factors of climate change, this has only gotten worse, and just like we're seeing in the lakes in the United States, we're seeing these toxic dust storms starting to form. And all of a sudden, this isn't looking like it's a localized issue to, say, the west coast of the United States, but it's looking like a global issue. And the fact remains that wherever we find these drying lakes, they may have similar stories and outcomes for the people and surrounding communities. And that's something we should be investigating and keeping an eye on. And right now, globally, it's really important because we're seeing quite a number of lake sources dry up and other water sources. From Lake Mead to the Danube, from the Yangtze to the Garden of Eden in Iraq, waterways are drying up consistently across the globe. And the question really does remain, what toxic dust may be found from these other sources, and how will they affect those downwind as we start seeing the other effects of climate change start to affect our reality? And we see the dusty, arid remains of these former waterways turn into literal poison for people's lungs. So with that said, if you've enjoyed what you've watched here today, consider liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment, as well as joining my Discord where we have conversations on political topics like these. If you're in a financial place to do so, and only if you're in a financial place to do so, please do consider supporting me on Patreon, especially as political content like this can often be demonetized on YouTube. The links for everything that I mentioned are in the description down below. So with that said, my name is Anarchist Tara. Thank you so much for watching.